Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer, I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please take a second to turn off or silence your phones so we don't have any disruptions. As for announcements, on December 3rd and 4th, we will be having our annual holiday home tour. Tickets are now for sale online only. You can find them on the main page of our website, ameliamuseum.org, so be sure to get them before they sell out. We also have wrap cards at that back table by the door next to Thea, so you can grab one of those. Our next Third on Third on November 19th will be with Dr. Michael Butler. As part of the Florida Humanities Florida Talk series, he will speak about Martin Luther King Jr.'s time in St. Augustine during the Civil Rights Movement, so that should be really interesting. If you haven't seen it yet, we currently have a Cuban art exhibit in the temporary exhibit gallery downstairs. It runs through early December, and to close out that exhibit, our next Brown Bag Lunch on December 1st will be with photographer Steve Lineberg, who will discuss his collection of Cuban photography. Also, if you have an evaluation sheet at your table, please fill it out after the program and return it to the little basket at that back table, also near Thea. So that's it for announcements, but today we have Eric Schmidt from WestRock. Mr. Schmidt is the Community Relations and Training Lead for WestRock's Fernandina Beach Mill. In 1978, he and his wife moved to Fernandina, where he served as the environmental manager for what was Container Corporation. During his 40-plus year career in environmental engineering, he has worked internationally and in all but 4 states in the U.S. In 2018, he rejoined WestRock Fernandina Beach Mill to coordinate WestRock support for various nonprofit organizations and the Nassau County community, while also managing the mill's training program. So everyone, please welcome Eric.
Thank you, and thanks for coming. Welcome. Summer Bias has helped a lot, so we need to thank her and Phyllis Davis and the rest of the museum staff. It's a great facility. I'm glad you're all here. If it's the first time you've been here, please take time to take a tour. If you've been here before, take another tour. So today we're going to talk about the history of papermaking on the island. We'll start with some slides that show the mill as it came up out of the ground back in late 1930s. It will progress up. We'll talk about a few other issues, and then we'll show a video of the current papermaking process so you can have an appreciation. It's sort of a video tour. We can't give live tours at this point because of the pandemic, and even when we can, we have limited tours for that. So this will be a chance for you to take a tour of the paper mill that was Container Corporation. It's had several other owners and is now called WestRock. As I talk about this, there is another mill on the island, the Rainier Advanced Materials Mill. They make just pulp, but then they take that pulp and it's made into lots of different materials. There's a handout in back that talks about some of the things that you can make from that pulp that Rainier makes and that we make also. So with that as a start, we'll go. So this was the site back in the mid to late 1930s. What happened then was we were a little fishing village at that time, about 3,000 people. If you think back, we're coming out of the Depression at the time, so the city commission at the time said, hey, we need to get a more diverse economy in here than just shrimping or fishing or subsistence agriculture. So they tried to attract a couple industries. They were successful in doing that to bring in two forest products companies. One was Container Corporation and one was Rainier. Rainier is now 2 different companies, the Wildlight Rainier and the Rainier Advanced Materials Mill. So that name Rainier was about a year after the Container Corporation mill was built. So let's just go through a visual of how the mill was built. So a lot of the materials came in, and no, this isn't Brett's underpinnings. or maybe it is. But you can see we brought a lot of the materials to build the mill in via water. That was one of the resources that was attractive for this location to build a mill, is the close availability of water and water transportation. So that's another view of where the mill is going to be built. You can see there's not a whole lot of other development. So they brought in heavy equipment. This is some of the old style equipment for doing some of the borings to check what the soil and sand conditions were under what would be the foundations for the mill. You can see where this would not be allowed today if these were considered wetlands by Florida DEP. You'd have trouble with that according to current city regulation. But this is 1930s. Okay, it's a different time. So you can see where the site was being prepped for the mill. So we started putting the foundations in. You can see some of the underpinnings, the pre-stressed concrete beams that were actually built on site. These were what used to be called steam shovels in old days. Now they're powered by fossil fuels. So you can see the rail track that came in. So in addition to bringing materials in by water, the materials also came in using rail. Another important resource that made this area attractive for the mills to locate here. By the way, I ought to do a sound check. Am I loud enough or too loud? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I've got a really cool device here that goes right to his hearing aid. He'll be selling those after this. So here's an interesting picture, again, comparing then, the 30s, with today. Right now, there's no hard hat in this picture, if you notice. There's no safety vest, there's no ear protection. Also, as far as ergonomics, those people are having to bend way down to do the rebar work. So they're actually putting the rebar in to make the pre-stressed concrete structures that will then become the underpinning of the mill buildings. So they actually were built on site back then. Now you would bring them in typically. So again, that's some of the borings that would go down to create the foundation for the mill buildings. That's a test pit right there that was used to determine what the percolation rate, that is, you put water on the soil and see how fast it drains. That's an important part of construction. Again, the docks. So there's the mill starting to go up. It's getting all the foundations put in. You can see the rail line over here, again, where they brought materials in. You can see no hard hats. So there's the mill starting to go up. That's the original boiler stack going up in the middle of the boiler house. Some tanks starting to go in. You can see how close to the river it is. The skeletal structure of the buildings. Now it's really starting to go up. You can see the size of the mill a little bit as a perspective. This is a person right here. You can see a truck parked there and how small a truck appears inside that building. And that building still exists. Starting to get more. You can see the large boiler stack. That stack is no longer here. So there it is. That was when the mill very early on. I think that's about a late 1940s picture. A little bit later on, and that's close to current day. You can see the port of Fernandina is here. That's the mill. Boscobello Cemetery is up there, and I know some people call to complain about noise and the smell and things with the mill. Boscobello residents never call.
As far as you know.
So this was a big deal. So this is in 1938. Again, the Depression, we're just coming out of the Depression. It's just before World War II involvement for the U.S. It's starting to ramp up, but it was a really big deal. It had Claude Pepper. I mean, you might have heard that name as a U.S. Senator at the time. He came. The U.S. Secretary of Commerce came. It was advertised. There was a whole speaker program to commemorate the start of the mill. It was on national news. They also used to use it in newsreels before movies. They would show this the discussion about this mill in Fernandina. So it was nationally important. And again, more publicity. It was it had a whole lot of dignitaries that came to that dedication. It's part of the history. I like this picture for several reasons. One, I like their pants. I think those are really cool. I also note there's only one woman in the picture, but you know, again, it was that's 1930s time. You can see how things have changed as far as the management structure at the mill. But back then, a single female that I can see. So here's a picture I wanted to bring up. This I'm advancing now, but this is in the 1940s. So as World War II started, the way to get materials into prisoners of war through the Red Cross was to bring wooden crates, and they would drop those via parachute into prisoner of war camps. But they were limited by the weight of those wooden crates. So very early on, they decided they would use corrugated containers, boxes that we made, to get more supplies to prisoners of war. Before that, they would have to be weight limited because of wooden boxes. It was a lot lighter material to parachute them in. So that's pretty interesting history. Also, those boxes, this is D-Day. They were using corrugated boxes to bring materials in for D-Day. I think this is a really cool picture. I'm progressing now to the 70s. Again, it's history. It's actually a contest sponsored by Container Corporation of America, and they had a person submit the now very familiar symbol for recycling, those three chasing arrows. So that was actually a Container Corporation of America contest that actually was won by someone who submitted that from California. Okay. So those were the slides. That brought you very quickly through the history of the mill. We are going to have time, I think, for a few questions, only good questions, okay? And maybe some answers. We'll see how that goes. But now we'll do a video tour of the current process for making paper. So Summer will cue that up.
Welcome to the WestRock Fernandina Beach Mill, where we produce high-quality craft paper. We invite you to join us for a look at the modern paper-making process. Our process begins with our raw materials: logs, wood chips, and recycled corrugated containers. Logs arrive at the mill by truck and are unloaded in the wood yard. These logs are debarked in a large rotating drum, where the tumbling action of the logs against one another removes the bark. Debarked logs are conveyed to the chipper to be converted into chips. Chips that arrive by truck are received at the truck dump. Chips are screened by size. Chips that are too small or too large are removed from the process, so that only the optimum chips are sent to the chip silos for use in our digester. Another important raw material is our recycled fiber, often referred to as OCC, or old corrugated containers. This material is repulped, cleaned, and used in the production process. The process of converting chips to pulp takes place in our pulp mill. Wood chips are fed into the K-Mir digester, where they're cooked with chemicals under intense heat and pressure. Spent chemicals are extracted from the digester and sent to our recovery boiler for processing and recycling. The pulp is then sent to pulp washers, where additional chemicals are removed. The clean pulp goes to high-density storage until it's needed in the paper-making process. The mill's recovery boiler is where the steam and electricity required for paper making are produced and distributed, and where the used pulping chemicals, called black liquor, are recovered and recycled for use back in the system. Spent chemicals are concentrated and sprayed into the recovery boiler, where combustible elements are burned away, leaving a molten material that becomes green liquor. In the lime kiln, lime is combined with the recovered green liquor through a chemical reaction that produces fresh white liquor, the main chemical required for cooking the wood chips. Stock from the pulp mill and OCC is mixed and diluted. The head box delivers the stock to the forge-renier wire, where the water removal process begins. From the forge-renier, the sheet enters the press section, where nips squeeze more water out and absorbent felts carry it away from the sheet. From the press section, the sheet enters the dryer section, where the sheet winds around a series of steam-filled dryer cans to further remove moisture. At the end of the paper machine, the sheet is wound onto large reels. The large reels are moved to the winder, where they're slit and rewound into smaller rolls to meet customer specifications. Finished rolls are conveyed to the warehouse, where operators move the roll to their proper destination, either to storage, a rail car, or a truck for shipment to our customers.
Okay, so now you've had a tour. Cover a couple other things and then we can ask some questions. So I've got a couple samples. I always tell people when I'm giving tours or we're training new people to come to the mill as employees, if you look at a box, it's made, and this is a pizza box before it's folded up to make a pizza box. If you look at a box like from Amazon or a pizza box or other shipping boxes, it looks like a sandwich. It's got a top, a bottom, and then a squiggly middle layer called corrugated. Okay, so that's how you make a box. Our mill here, we only make the bread in that sandwich. We make the top and the bottom. The squiggly stuff in the middle is made out of hardwood, and we make that at other mills, including down in Jacksonville. But the mill here in Fernandina makes the top and the bottom. That's all we make. So I'll pass some samples around of what we make. This is all we make. We make one thing, and that's the top and the bottom, the sandwich, if you will, in that box. This is also an example of a pizza box, but I'll pass this around. It does talk about the sustainability program for WestRock and how much recycle we use to make this box. I think you saw that in the video about recycling. So let me start this over here if you want to look at it, pass it around. And I'll give you a couple samples of this. Just pass them around. You guys, my lovely assistant Emily will pass these around. In the back, I also have, I mentioned this earlier, this is a list of all the things we get from trees. A lot of these are what Rayonier pulp goes into making. They make a bleached pulp that is used in making, in fact, you eat it. You eat what Rayonier Advanced Material Mill makes. It's in ice cream. It would be in shampoo, it's in ketchup, it's in a whole lot of things. So whenever you see cellulose on the ingredients of a product, that's the pulp that the Rayonier mill makes. And so it's a similar process up to the pulping process. One other thing in the back also is this is a study that was conducted by the University of Florida Economics Department. It's a 2016 study, so it's a little bit out of date. The numbers would be a little bit higher, but it talks about the economic impact of both of the mills here in Fernandina. And you can, again, they're back here if you're interested, but the number that intrigues me is it's $1.2 billion a year. That's 1.2 billion with a B as in boy, dollars a year of impact on the local economy. And when I talk to local high schools, I recently presented to 9 different high school classes, seniors, and when I talked about this to them, I said, just as a chance, I asked the first class, do you guys know how many $1 million in a billion? and they were reluctant to say, but finally one raised his hand and he said 10. And I said, no, that's wrong. And then someone else said, well, 100. No, that's wrong. There's $1,000 million in a billion. So this is $1,200 million of impact on the local economy. Now, that's not just the mills. That's the log trucks coming in, which we can talk about. Log truck drivers, timber harvesting, restaurants to support the mill. So it's a large economic impact, but it talks about the entire impact. And it's not just the city of Fernandina, it's the whole island, it's the whole county, it's really a regional number. But remember that, it's 1,000 million and a billion. Okay. You know how many billion and a trillion? 1,000. So a trillion is a million. So when the government's going to spend $1 trillion, it's $1 million. It's hard to remember those kind of numbers. Okay.
I know, right?
So you've had the slides about the history. You've had a tour. You got some things to look at. I've talked a lot. I'm ready for some questions. Yes, ma'am.
From the dock that's down, we're new to the area, but down at the very end of Center Street, there's a dock, and then from that dock you see these mounds of what look like sand, basically. What is that?
Okay. That's wood chips, and if you look to the south, that's the Rayonier Mill, and that's their wood chips. I think you can see those better. From the river, you can see our wood chips. So the trees and chips come in. We chip the trees up. You saw that on the video. So those are big mounds, not sand. It's wood chips.
And they keep them outside until they're transported inside? Or?
Right. So those chips are 50% water that's come out of a tree anyway. So a little bit of surface water doesn't change the percentage of water. Good question. Yes, sir.
Two questions. First, the video seemed to indicate that, do you make your own electricity? You generate your own?
Oh, wow, thank you. I'll pay you later. He wants to know about, if you didn't hear him, he asked about electricity generation, and we do generate our own electricity. We do it largely from biofuels. That is the black liquor they talked about, which was the lignin in that chip. So we take the fiber and we make a box out of it, but the lignin that holds together that wood chip, we burn that for energy. We also burn the bark. You saw that big tumbling thing. When the trees come in, we knock the bark off just mechanically, going around and around in there. We take that bark and make electricity. We also burn fossil fuels. We do also burn natural gas, a little bit of oil, and some coal. But we also make more energy typically than we need, so we actually sell that into the grid. But it's a good question on electricity. Let me expand on that a little bit if I can. During the recent visioning session studies and surveys for the city, it was brought up about resiliency. And one of the key parts of resiliency for the island and for the city is how fast can we come back up after a disaster, after a hurricane, if you will, or a bad storm. Well, our island and our city are able to come back quicker up onto the electric grid than the mainland. And it's really largely, I believe this is true, both mills are able to start generating electricity quicker, so we can come up quicker, more resilient that way. We're more self-reliant on energy. So, good question. One more.
The second question was, how long does it take to chip a log?
To chip a log, a matter of seconds. It goes through a large chipper, and it just feeds right through. Probably 5 seconds to do a log, something like that. Yes, ma'am.
What happens to the chemicals after they are used?
Well, these are great questions. So she wants to know what happens to the chemicals after they're used. The answer is they're reused. They're used and used and used. So there was a term in that video, if you heard, recovery boiler. I don't know if you heard that term. We have two of those. The term recovery, it's to recover two things: the chemicals in the pulping process. And remember that kind of orange smelt that was coming out of that one spout? Those are chemicals. We're taking those back and we're reusing them again. You have to add a little bit more because you lose a little bit as you go through the process. So it recovers the chemicals, that recovery boiler. It also recovers energy, and that's where we get some of the electric power from burning that lignin in that liquor.
So nothing is dumped into the river.
Okay, she asks if nothing is dumped in the river, that's not true. Okay. Again, I think Summer mentioned my background is environmental engineering, so we do have wastewater that goes into the river, but every gallon of water that we start using, it's clean, we use between 10 and 15 times in the process. It's used and reused and used. When it's got too much carbon in it, we go ahead and put it in our wastewater treatment system. We take out about 98 to 99% of that carbon, and then the rest is discharged in the Amelia River. So we do discharge into the river.
What do you do with the carbon?
She wants to know what we do with the carbon. Great question. So the carbon, if you remember from high school biology, remember parameciums? Remember that term? So those are used, and we cultivate that bacteria to eat the carbon. And that's part of the wastewater treatment system. Yes, sir.
Odor, and does it come primarily from the digester, or what part of the process is the odor generated?
Odor, he doesn't.
You have solved it. Even over the past 7 years, there's a big difference.
Hold on. Or did you have a comment about odor before I answer? Okay.
St. Joe's has a paper mill in Cantonment, which is just north of Pensacola.
Not anymore.
We just moved in there. We're familiar with it.
But the St. Joe mill is shut down.
Yeah, but it stunk real bad.
It's the smell of
So what do you do differently?
Miss Branch over here just made a comment. Go ahead, share it with everyone.
My dad used to say it's the smell of money.
But hey, it's a fair question, sir. So on odor, and I've heard a couple of comments about that. So what happens is the process that we use to make that paper is called the kraft process. It's a sulfur-based process where we digest those wood chips to get that lignin to make the power and then the fiber to make the paper. So that sulfur-based process does create 4 components of what's called total reduced sulfur compounds, okay? Mainly hydrogen sulfide. In the past, in the 70s, when I first got here, we would just let that go up the atmosphere and you could smell it quite a bit. Environmental regulations have changed over the 40 years that I've been associated with the pulp and paper industry. Both the US EPA and Florida DEP require us now to collect that odor-causing gas, and we burn it. Remember that lime kiln, that big, long cylinder we saw in the video? We put that sulfur compound in there. That's about 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit in that kiln, and we burn those gases to eliminate those gases that cause that odor. It's not perfect. You can still smell. And let me say this, one of those 4 components is dimethyl disulfide. We actually collect that. We sell it to natural gas companies. Natural gas doesn't typically have an odor to it, but you want to know if you have a leak of natural gas. So we sell that compound that's produced in the kraft process. We sell it to the gas company. They put it in natural gas so you can smell it, only because you can smell it in very, very low parts per billion. There's billion again. Parts per billion. So 1 part per billion of that material you can actually detect and smell. So that's why that's there. Okay? Yes, sir.
Do you have any information on accident rates for those trucks? And do you have any safety programs that you've introduced?
The question is about accident rates for the trucks, I presume that log trucks, and safety issues. So, fair question. I don't have any specific accident rates. We do have, the logs do come into the mill. We bring about 250 trucks a day into the mill. We make about 3,000 tons a day of paper. And so remember I mentioned that a chip has 50% water, or that tree has 50% water. So you have to bring in twice the weight of those raw materials to make that product. So it's a lot of weight of fiber that we're bringing in. As far as the log trucks, those are independent contractors. They don't work for us, but we do try to monitor what they do. If we get information about a trucking firm or a specific driver that's causing a problem, we do follow up with that. But I don't have specific rates as far as accidents go. Yes, ma'am.
The trucks that come into your operation are the 2 split trucks that have smaller groups of logs instead of the real long logs that seem to be going to the Rainier Advanced Materials.
I did not hire her to ask that.
It's in your video. So, because they had two, a split truck picking up two different
No,
things. What
very,
is the
very
question?
astute. So here's what happens. If I get a call about a log truck causing a problem, first thing I ask, is that a long log or is it the two short logs? If it's a long log, it's gonna go to the Rayonier mill, okay?
Yeah.
If it's two short ones, it's most likely coming to our mill. We don't have, remember that tumbling thing?
Yeah.
We can't handle a long log in that, so that's why we only bring in the short logs. So if you have a long log complaint, don't call me. Yes, ma'am.
How many employees do you have, and what is the recruiting locally? What is the participation of the local community in your place?
Is that Robin back there behind me?
Yeah.
Good question. So how many employees do we have? Right now we have, at the mill itself, we have about 460 full-time employees. That's salaried and hourly, 460. We also have a box plant that's part of our mill, which is unusual for a big mill like ours, but we can actually take some of those rolls, a small portion, with a forklift truck over and actually make boxes there at our box plant. It's about 130, 140 people there. So overall about 600 local employees. I think Rayonier is about half of that, but I don't want to be quoted on how many Rayonier people. Was that your full question, Robin?
Well, I was just wondering if most of those people are natives, local residents who came
So her
up to
question
the school system.
Of those 600 employees, what proportion are local? Actually, we do pay a good rate, a good salary and a good hourly rate for people, but a lot of people are being priced out of the city of Fernandina. So a certain percentage, probably maybe 10%, live in the city. They all live generally in the area because they have to come into the mill to work. Some do come from Kingsland and St. Mary's. Some come from Duval, but a large portion of our workforce comes from Nassau County. Okay, hold on. Yes, sir.
I had a question about how did the paper mill do during COVID, during the great toilet paper shortage?
All right. So there's a question about how did we do during the COVID, which is still going on, issues, and the toilet paper shortage. Right? That's a question. So good questions. One is we ran all the way through that. We have a whole lot of disinfecting going on between shifts. We have all kinds of safety requirements. That's part of why we don't do tours right now. But we have been able to run straight through without any interruptions. The toilet paper issue, I did get calls when we couldn't get toilet paper saying, why don't you guys quit making boxes and start making toilet paper? Well, that would require a whole different process. You have to bleach paper, and it's a whole different pulping process to make toilet paper. You wouldn't want to use those samples. Yes, ma'am.
Are the trains transporting anything out of your mill?
Okay, are trains transporting anything out of our mill? Yes, out of our mill. That's a good point. Yes, we send a lot of our product out. We send it by 3 different methods. One is by ship through the port, and it goes internationally. We send those big rolls of paper out all over the world. We also send it out by truck, some by truck, but a large portion does go out by rail. That's right. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Where do the logs come from, and do you own the location the logs come from?
Okay, where do the logs come from is the question. So the answer to that is so a lot of mills, a lot of pulp mills are located out in the middle of what's called a wood basket or a forest, if you will. And they can bring in wood from 360 degrees. Well, we have an ocean on one side, so there goes 180 degrees for our mill. We also have South Florida, so from about 120 degree radius, remember 90 degrees is a quarter, so about this far out, so we go out a little over 100 miles to bring in our fiber. But remember, in addition to the trees that we bring in, we also bring in chips. We also bring in recycle. Let me just bring that up for a second. It was in the video. So we use about 400 tons a day of recycled fiber. And that recycle is the boxes that come out of the back of Publix or Walmart or what you put in recycle. We use 400 tons every day of that. We use in a week, and I think these statistics are right. We use in a week what about Amelia Island, the whole island generates in a year of those corrugated containers. So we take that and we beat it up. You saw part of the video. It showed like a big blender. We blend that in with what's called virgin fiber, the tree chips that come in, or the chips. We take that recycle. We can only tolerate about 10 to 12% recycled fiber because, again, that box has to have certain strength characteristics, so you can't use all recycle. The squiggly stuff in the middle, the corrugated, that can be all recycled. I got a little off subject of your question, but did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Are we okay, Summer?
Yep, we're at 12:35.
Oh, okay. Uh-oh.
The gas you said that you sell to the gas companies, or the chemicals you sell to the gas, how do you transport that to the gas companies?
She wants to know how, I mentioned that dimethyl disulfide that we send to the gas company. I don't know for sure. She wants to know how we transport that safely. But I don't know. I don't know what kind of a cylinder or container it goes in.
Is it trucked or trained?
No, it would be small amounts. It's forget that parts per billion. It's not a whole lot. Yes, ma'am.
There are two paper mills. Are you in competition or do they do something different?
Her question is, there's two paper mills on the island. Are we in competition? And let me clarify, there's one paper mill and two pulp mills. So we both make pulp. I just want to be careful to use the right terminology. So we both make pulp. We continue to make paper. The Rainier Advanced Materials mill just makes pulp. Are we in competition? For some things like wood fiber, sure, and for employees, typically we are. But we get along very well with them. We're often lumped together. A lot of people come over the Shade Bridge and they don't know which mill is which.
Yeah.
That's right. And probably a lot of people don't know that. If you work there, you know. We do work together. We have to be careful about antitrust issues, and as far as cooperation goes. We actually take one of their acid, what would be a waste, and we actually use some of that in our process. So we're a customer of theirs for some small amount of things. Did that answer your question?
Basically, yes. Thank you.
Of the number of trucks that are coming in, totally over 818 coming in here, how many are for your plants and how many are for the other? Are you a big percentage or are you smaller?
Question, what's the percentage of those log trucks that come to WestRock versus Rainier Advanced Materials mill? I don't know the exact number. We would have a larger proportion.
A larger number.
Because we make more tons of paper than they make of pulp. They make more money than we do, I think.
Have you looked at the railing of bringing it by railroad?
Great question. We get asked that a lot. So instead of those log trucks, why don't we bring it in all by rail? And there was a question about what we use rail for products going out. We use rail for that. Let me just draw a picture for you on the question about using rail to bring in logs. So go out to a forest or a plantation where you have pines planted. Okay, there's not a rail line there, right? You can't put a railroad through a forest area typically. They're in very specific areas. So you go out there and you want to harvest that log. So you take that log. Well, now you got to load it onto a truck. And you got to take that truck to a railroad. You got to unload that onto a railroad. You got to take that railroad or train into the mill. You got to unload that train, and you got to transport it over to the operation part of the mill. So the answer is logistics. And you hear that's in the news right now. All the problems with logistics and drivers and things like that, and getting materials moved. So it would be uneconomical to bring trees in via the railroad because you'd have so many handling of it. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Does the company get involved with the tree growing facilities?
Well, this is a good table right here.
I'm asking, I can see that it's all been planted and all a certain size we can cut down. So the growth cycle is probably very short to produce the wood necessary.
So the question is essentially, how do we make sure we have enough trees to come in? What kind of sustainable programs do we have?
About what the environmental effect is with regards to the trees
Okay.
and so on.
The
I can
environmental
understand
effect-
how they ship truck and all that.
Sure, the environmental effects of forestry, and the trees and how we harvest them. You know, some people, when you get an email or a message that says, save a tree, don't print. You see that message sometimes.
Right.
I always want to turn that around. We plant, the industry plants about 3.5 to 4 trees for every tree that's harvested. So I like to say, print because you're going to make more trees. I know that's a little self-serving, but
No, you said the industry. So in other words, there's a regulatory body made up of all of the paper mill, or a large part of the paper mill product, who oversees the forestry and the thing. Or is it another agency or a federal agency or government?
Okay. Very involved question, and even more involved answer. So his question is there an industry, a regulatory body, or an industry-wide forestry program? The answer is no. There are some regulations that affect all that industry, but every company, every mill, every lumber mill, everybody that makes 2x4s and plywood, they all get their wood independently. So there's not an overall one agency to go to that everybody gets a little bit of trees from. But there are forestry regulations, there are US EPA regulations, there are Florida DEP regulations. That box, I don't know where it went around. So it talks about, right, some good, this is a really good table, I really like it. It talks about the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. So we make sure that the wood we buy is harvested from sites that are environmentally responsibly grown and maintained and harvested. It is a crop. You know, you'll see as you go out I-10, you can see it's not willy-nilly trees like you see in a regular virgin forest. It's actually planted. His question also went to the cycle. So one of the reasons the pulp and paper industries in the southeast, it used to be largely up in the northwest, and the plywood industry was up in the northwest. But it takes about 50 years for a tree rotation in the northwest to get a tree the size they need to harvest. Here in the south, it's between 20 and 23 years for this pine. It's fast-growing fiber. So that's why most pulp and paper mills are in the southeast. It follows where those trees are. So there are stringent environmental requirements about harvesting, about road building, that do affect all that industry, but it's not a single, it's a myriad of different environmental regulations on that. Is there an impact? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, there is, but there's an impact for everything. Yes, ma'am.
Pre-COVID, I think, when I would go up to the north end of the island, I saw stockpiles of your trees off in one corner that I don't see anymore. Literally, the whole upper corner of your property, I think it's your property, you know, that had an extra gate that I made a right turn or left turn. Is that just because of COVID, or is there a lack of business or something that you slowed down?
So her question is about what we would call the meadow. There, it's kind of bound by Franklin Street and North 14th Street is where she's talking about. And you see, it's got live oak trees and a meadow out there. And every once in a while, you'll see a whole bunch of logs show up, and then the logs disappear. So, and that goes to the question about the piles of sand when you come over. Somebody asked a question about that. We usually try to keep an inventory of chips ready to go so that we have enough to make our product. You know, have to have a certain amount of inventory. We also need to have a certain number of trees to make those chips on site. Different weather conditions can affect things. If there's a truck issue or a road issue, we can't get the trees in. We want to have enough so we can keep running and keep an even production cycle. So when we shut down or we have a big mill maintenance issue going on, we have people that are relying on that money. I remember I talked about $1.2 billion. Well, those people that rely on supplying wood to the mills need to be able to keep making that money. So we allow them to bring in the trees while we're not using them, and that's a kind of a shock absorber, if you will. We use that area to bring those trees in while we're not actually using them as fast. Then we start back up and we pull those trees out, and that's why it goes up and down.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
I got a question, it's kind of off the beaten path. But I belong to the Craft 10 Acres Athletic Club.
Okay.
And I understand that's owned by the paper mill, formed back in the days for the employees. Prime property, but can never be sold because they need 100% of the owners to agree. Can you tell me about that?
Okay. So she's asking about a property, it's called 10 Acres, or the Craft Athletic Club. It's down on the Amelia Island Parkway, so south of near the roundabout, by Harris Teeter-ish. So that's called 10 Acres. I think an engineer named it because it's 10 acres. And so that was a container corporation property that the employees bought. It was an employee group, original, I think about 50 original employees. They chipped in $50 or $100 and bought that 10 acres and made it sort of a recreation facility. They used it for picnics, and now it's largely used for tennis, and it's associated with the Craft Tennis Association, which I guess you're part of. Just by way of, there's also one called Chemcell, which is further up towards kind of where Barbara Jean's is-ish. That was the Rayonier one, very similar operation. So Chemcell and 10 acres. As far as ownership goes and the incorporation papers, I'm really not aware. I went there as a young engineer. We would have a monthly speaker, better than I was, and we would hear about different subjects. So I've been going there for a long time. We've gone to picnics there and things like that, but it used to be wide open, but the tennis facilities have expanded. I don't know what the articles in the corporation for that land are. I don't know what the restrictions are. Okay. Yes, sir.
Are you using a gas turbine for electric and heat out of the plant now?
Are we using a gas turbine? We do have turbines. Essentially, they're all really run on a gas, but the steam or the gas that goes into it turns the turbine, makes electricity. We use natural gas. So here's a question on that, or a point on natural gas. For a long time, we didn't have natural gas on the island. You could get propane, put in a propane cylinder. But recently, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we got gas onto the island. That pipeline comes under the shaved ridge onto the island. And what happened was both WestRock and Rayonier Advanced Materials said, hey, natural gas company, we'll guarantee you we'll use a certain amount of gas, a certain amount of therms of natural gas, if you'll bring it on the island. And so it made it economically feasible for them to bring natural gas. We take that gas and we burn it in one of the boilers. And then that makes the steam and does the turbines and makes electricity. So in a way, we use natural gas to make electricity. We do. Does that answer your question?
I was thinking of using the natural gas going through a jet engine.
Okay, so he wants to know, could we use natural gas like on a jet engine? Good point. There's a project over at the Rayonier Advanced Materials Mill called 8 Flags Energy. And it uses, it's called a cogen plant. So when you make electricity, you need real high level steam, high pressure steam, and it turns the turbine. Well, at some point, it doesn't have enough high pressure in it, and you can't make electricity anymore. So what they do at Rayonier is when they use it to make electricity, it's a jet engine essentially to make electricity with that turbine. When they get all the useful energy and BTUs they can get, British thermal units, as they can get out of that steam, they take that and it's used to dry their pulp. That's why it's called a cogeneration. In fact, we're looking at partnering with FPU to do the same thing. We're going to call it 9 Flags Energy. If an engineer names it. And we'll do the same thing where you make electricity out of that gas directly with the jet engine. It's a real efficient way to make electricity. It also goes to that resiliency issue of it would make the mill, if we did that, it would make the entire island totally energy dependent. All the electricity needed on the island would be generated right here on the island if that project went through. And then you take that steam and you use it to dry the paper. You saw that on the video, those big drums, steam drums. You put steam in there to dry the last little bit of moisture out of the paper. And so we would take what they would have to waste if it was at a power plant only, and we would take, it's called a thermal host. We would be the thermal host for that cogen. It's real efficient. It's a real efficient way to use that natural gas. You've had enough.
How clean does a box need to be successfully recycled? Like, could you ever recycle a pizza box, or is it too greasy? You know?
Okay, so her question is, how clean does a box need to be able to be recycled? It varies. You know, don't leave a slice. Of course, none of you would leave a slice of pizza. But a little bit of cheese, we can handle that. That wastewater treatment system, those paramecium we talked about, they can eat that too. So we can take a little bit of that. What we can't tolerate is styrofoam. Styrofoam is the bane of our existence. It floats to the top, it plugs things. So just so you know, those boxes that come out of a Publix or a Walmart here, go down to Jacksonville. We have actually a recycling division. It's time to wake up. Or take a pill.
Brains and boards.
So what we do, Summer, is we take, those are shipped down to our recycling operation in Jacksonville. Honest to goodness, there's people there and their job, so it gets loaded on a big concrete apron. They put what's in a garbage truck or a recycle truck or recycle containers. It goes on a conveyor, and there's people there that are sort. Some of it's mechanical, but as a final step, there's people there that sort glass, metal, paper by hand. The paper that comes out of that is put in bales, and I think you saw a picture of some of the bales. They come back here and we make paper out of it. So the original question is, we can tolerate some, but please try to make it as clean as possible. No plastic, if you can avoid plastic. Staples in something, that's okay. Don't worry about that. We have magnets that take that out in that recycling process. We take those 400 tons in. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What causes the banging I hear at night?
I'm sorry, I had trouble with that.
What causes the banging sound I hear at night?
Okay, so she wants to know what causes the banging sound she hears at night. Where do you live?
On 10th and Ash.
South 10th. Okay, it could be from several things. Remember that cylinder you saw rolling around? Those are logs banging against each other. So it could be that, although that's on the other side of the mill from you. So I would suspect that's not that. But Rainier has another similar operation, and it depends on weather conditions and wind direction. It could be what you're hearing, but I can't tell you for sure. Okay.
It just mentioned that the large pieces, the chips, and the small chips are discarded or do not go through the process. What happens to them?
So she paid attention to the video. So remember, it had that big table of chips, and they were kind of vibrating. So what happens? She wants to know what happens to the off-size ones, either too big or too small. The answer is, if it's too big, we chip it again, so it's small enough to use. If it's too small, we put those in the boilers and make electricity out of it. Nothing is wasted. We use every part of the tree, any kind of small particles that we can't make paper out of, we use for making energy.
Did you ever publish what your heat efficiency is on your operation?
So he must be an old boiler guy. He wants to know what our efficiency is on our boilers.
Well, on all power, they're all power in.
Okay.
Power what you're receiving.
Well, check me on this answer. So it depends. Some boilers and depends on when they were built, are less efficient than others. Some fuels are more efficient. When you burn natural gas, it's really efficient to make electricity. In other words, the BTUs in create certain BTUs of steam out, and you lose very little when you're burning natural gas. But if you're burning a difficult material like bark, which is variable, and it's 50% water, remember that bark, natural gas is dry. So you're burning some water, you have to use some of those BTUs to make electricity. You have to evaporate that water before you can make that steam. So that's probably in the 70s. Natural gas is in the 90s. And then that black liquor we talked about is somewhere in between.
I was referring more for the whole plant. In other words,
The whole plant?
the whole plant efficiency, because that's part of how they judge today. How good you are is how much you use the energy that you get in, and the energy that you use, and the percentage of how good you operate it is how you use that power.
The answer to that is, the truth is in the pudding. If we weren't efficient, we couldn't stay in business, and we have to compete with other people making paper. So we have to be as efficient as possible. Number, I don't know, there's a thing called yield. Yield is if you bring a pound of fiber in, how many pounds of paper did you make out of that? That's on the production side. That's called yield, and we work really hard on that yield to get as much paper out of that fiber as we can. On energy, again, we're competitive. I don't know, I can't tell you as a whole. Again, between 70 and 90, and it depends on what fuels we're burning. Okay. Yes, sir.
Years ago, ships went into the Ryanair mill to load the pulp. Did ships ever go to the containers?
You mean by boat, by water? Question is, did we ever get ships in by boat? I don't know that we did. We got oil in.
No, to load the pulp or the paper.
To go out?
Yeah.
Well, again, we use the port now. We take about 30% of our paper product goes to the port. It's loaded in the ships and goes internationally. It goes all over the world.
So before that. Big ships used to go to the Ryanair mill.
Okay.
They docked at the Ryanair mill. But I don't remember them docking.
Yeah, we never had a large dock, so I don't know that happened. I've only been associated for, that 84-year-old mill. I got about half of that time with me. But the time before me, I don't know, but there's not a big dock there, so my presumption is no, we weren't capable of bringing large ships like Ryanair. Ryanair has a bigger dock. Ryanair Advanced Materials, be careful. They're not Ryanair, they're Ryanair Advanced Materials. I got you.
No.
That was great. Awesome.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the Third on Third on November 19th.
Thank you.